Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a new installment of the Dylbozer's Den. Joined with you today is your new host, Count Ooga Booga. The Dylbozer is just hanging around the house currently. Today you're joined by me, and I'm here to go over a very fitting album for the day in question, as it is Halloween, All Hallows Eve, my favorite holiday. We're going to be discussing the newest release from Detroit, Michigan's own death metal long players, heavyweights, the Black Dahlia Murder, and their new album, Servitude. We know that this band has been around since the year 2000. We know that they are a quarter century into their careers with a legacy of releases going as far back as their debut in 2003 on Hollowed to their most prior release, Verminous, from 2020. As we know as well, the band has suffered a bit of tragedy within the last handful of years, and the loss of their longtime vocalist, Trevor. Mental health is really important, even in the death metal world. Check on your friends, check on your loved ones, check on yourself. This is a long-awaited return from the band. This is also an album I believe all of the band's fans and all of the extreme metal world was waiting to hear what it was going to sound like. Luckily, the band has decided to move forth post this tragedy. And Brian Eschbach, the band's longtime guitar player and lone original member at this point, has decided to step into the vocal booth and step into those very big shoes that were left to fill and move forward as the band's vocalist. Not only do we have the tragedy of the passing, but we also had the COVID years that kind of haltered the band's trajectory a little bit and movement a little bit, as it did with every other band releasing things throughout 2020 and 2021. Verminous was released in April of 2020, just mere weeks after everybody was sent home and lockdown ensued and everybody was socially distancing. So the band really didn't get the tour on this album until sometime in 2021. And that was almost 2 years into that album's cycle. When the band started the touring for that, Trevor was touring, and when the band ended the touring, it was Brian taking over for the vocals in the early part of 2023. But that's enough about the background of this band. I think everybody that understands that this band is really important to the death metal scene of the early 2000s on forth. This band has proven itself to be a legacy act through and through, rivaling even that of label mates Cannibal Corpse at this point in time. You know, what do we expect from a Black Dahlia Murder release? I think we expect a lot of really great tunes, really fast playing, a fun, lively energy, you know, really bouncy songs. A lot of their influences are being worn on their sleeves, maybe more so earlier in their career. Into this point in time, you're getting a band that is very finely tuned, and their influences have created the style of death metal this band is proficient in. Some people would classify it as melodic death metal. Some people just call it, like myself, just call it death metal. But it's really catchy, it's really fun, and it's a really short record. So let's kind of dig into this as we're moving forward. As I mentioned, Brian Eschbach is stepping into those big vocal shoes on this record. He's the lone original member of the band. He was primarily the sole songwriter with the band. And on this release, he has shared writing creds with a couple other members of the band, such as the returning Ryan Knight, whose last album with the band was 2015's Abysmal. Ryan had joined prior to 2009's Deflorate, and he was formerly a member of the band Arsis and actually played on that band's album, We Are the Nightmare. You have the band's longest tenured bassist, Max Lavelle, who joined in 2012. He's also formerly a member of Goratory, which is a really wild, brutal death metal / grind band from the New England area, as well as Canadian legendaries Despised Icon. You have Alan Cassidy returning on drums, whose first album was Max's first album as well, which was Everblack back in 2013. Returning as well is Brandon Ellis, who is the newest member of the band, who joined in 2016 and whose first album was Nightbringers in 2017. Also a former member of Arsis, as well as I mentioned Ryan Knight was. Brandon not only was a new member for Nightbringers, but he also handled kind of the mixing, producing, and recording of guitars. It seems like the band recorded all the stringed instruments with Brandon on this record as well, making it a little bit more comfortable, a little bit easier. They can dedicate most of their time there. They don't have to worry about money. They don't have to worry about spending money on a studio to stay in there. They can save a little cash, but also, you know, who's going to know the band better than someone that's been involved with it for the last handful of years? On the production and recording side, aside from Brandon Ellis, we have Mark Lewis, who has done so many great records and done so much work with this band. He started working with the Black Dahlia Murder with Nocturnal up until Abysmal. You have Ted Jensen of Sterling Sound doing the mastering, who has worked with Alice in Chains, Behemoth, Down, Mastodon, and many, many more. The artwork this go around is handled by Paul Girardi, who's worked with Artificial Brain, Cripsopsy, Power Trip, and Revocation. So anyway, let's dig into this fucking record, because what are we really here for? We're here for the fucking riffs. Even an undead bloodsucker such as myself loves a good riff. When you look at bands as far back as Coven, Cradle of Filth, and you look at, a lot of the spooky bands, Casey and the Sunshine Band, Simon and Garfunkel, Bruce Springsteen, all the spooky bands, they have one thing in common, and that's riffs. And the Black Dahlia Murder is no stranger to the riff game, right? Evening Ephemeral, the opening track, minute and 15 seconds in, you got a classic Black Dahlia Murder riff. A lot of melodic sensibilities, a lot of the classic death metal influence there, even some thrash influence with it. You go to a track like Aftermath, 32 seconds in, you get one of those great kind of at the gates, Heartwork era Carcass mellow death riffs. Again, just wearing their influences on their sleeves, but playing it in their style so it doesn't seem derivative even this far into their career. Because we're not really measuring the Black Dahlia Murder against other bands. We're at this point in their career, we're measuring them against themselves. We want to know that every release is as good as the prior release. Because one thing I know about the Black Dahlia Murder is you never get a bad album. You never get a bad record with this band, and I don't think you ever will. Do people have their favorite records of this band? Absolutely. Mine's Ritual, personally. Ritual and Deflorate. Those are my two favorites from this band. But none of their records are bad. Not a single one of their records is bad. They've had different lineups, different players, so on and so forth. You get to the next track, Panic Hysteric. The opening riff again. Great classic Black Dahlia Murder riff. You're not missing anything with this. Regardless as to who is in this band and who's writing in it, most of these guys have collectively been in this band for multiple years and done multiple albums each, so they know what they're bringing to the forefront with this band. Then we get into my favorite track on the album, which is Servitude, and the opening riff is just tech metal fucking madness. I love this song. It is my favorite song on this record. And then you get to Utopia Black, which is the final track on the record. And you have two riffs in particular on this record that really stuck out to me the most. You have the riff at 15 seconds in, which is this mellow death come thrash riff. And then at 2 minutes and 33 seconds in, you've got probably the meanest fucking riff on the whole record. That's just a big, thick meat and potatoes death metal riff. Kind of has some hardcore influence in there, maybe some Suffocation influence to riffs like that. But just really, really rad shit on this. Not only do we have great riffs on this record, you've got just fucking blistering solos upon solos on this album. This is the first record where you've really got two guys that are known as solo guys, right? In recent years, it's been Brian and Brandon. Brian is primarily rhythm guitars and riffs and that sort of thing, and Brandon playing the leads on it. Well, now you've got Ryan and Brandon on here that are just swapping back and forth on leads, kind of going back and forth like a classic heavy metal band, a la Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, a lot of those dual guitar bands that we're all familiar with. But these guys have a little bit more of a neoclassical vibe to them as well. It's really hard to separate who might be playing what. Yeah, you could really sit down and go, okay, right side is probably Ryan or Brandon, or left side is probably Ryan or Brandon. The only way I was able to tell is I could hear subtle differences with like vibrato based off of Floyd Rose being used, but their playing styles are so similar in a lot of ways that they blend so well together. It does feel like a really seamless transition with both of these guys in the band. I would say this album probably has the most solos that the band has ever done on one record alone. Evening Ephemeral, which the solo's starting at 2 minutes and 15 seconds in. It's just solo upon solo after that. You've got Cursed Creator with the solo at 2 minutes and 9 seconds in. And then you've got the solo at 2 minutes and 22 seconds in. You have the solo in Servitude at roughly 2 minutes in. And then you have the solo sections in Utopia Black at 1 minute and 56 seconds in. And then again at 2 minutes and 15 seconds in. With an album that was as much anticipated as Servitude was, I don't think any of us were disappointed with the amount of solos that were on this record, especially knowing the credentials of Ryan and Brandon. Let's get into the bass and drums on this record now. I would never really consider the band a bass-centric band. They've always had very proficient and good players. Former bassist Bart Williams and Max Lavelle being the longest tenured bassist the band has ever had. But Max is nothing to ignore. His bass sound is very thick. It's very low-end centric. It's heavily distorted, but it has enough clarity to it that it can pop out in the mix a little bit. But he locks in really well with Alan on drums here. Evening Ephemeral with the intro, with playing this great counterpoint melodic line that's cutting through the guitars while the guitars are, kind of doing their own thing. And then you've got Asserting Dominion at 1 minute and 40 that has this great bass line that's playing with the drums, under the drums, however you want to look at it. And then you hit a track like Servitude at 16 seconds in. He's playing these unison lines with the guitar that is extremely just dexterous. And that track alone is so fucking fast. I don't know how anybody's keeping up with it, but talk about keeping up, playing fast and all that. We've got to talk about Alan Cassidy's drums on this album. I think Alan has firmly cemented himself as the drummer for the Black Dahlia Murder. He took over for fan favorite Shannon Lucas around 2012, the post-Ritual era of the band. But I think Alan has just done a fantastic job of cementing his role in this band at this point. I mean, his performance on this whole fucking record is astounding. He should come up more in the best drummers in death metal categories. The entire track of Aftermath, he's just fucking ripping it. Cursed Creator, the intro section has this nasty hi-hat work. And at the back end of that track, you've got this crazy off-time snare stuff he's doing at the 2 minute and 33 second to about the 2 minute and 45 second point. Servitude. I don't have to say anything more. I mean, that entire track is just a lesson in technical proficiency. We've gone through all the instrumentation on this album and we've realized that it's just fucking top notch. Great performers all across the board. I know the biggest stress point as a fan for this band was, what's Brian going to sound like on a record? We know he's been able to keep up with it live. The Dylbozer said he saw them live early last year and they were just fantastic. Had a great time with it. He held it up live. Done fucking great. He sounds venomous on the entire record. He sounds absolutely maddening. He's screaming his head off. It's very raspy and ratchety. He's got variation in his vocals. He's doing some low stuff that even sounds reminiscent of like Johnny Davey from Job for a Cowboy. I mean, God, he's probably been belting out death metal tracks his entire life, starting out in his bedroom in front of the mirror, listening to fucking Morbid Angels albums or something. He did backing vocals for the band for years, so he's got a little bit of a skill there with it. He was the only logical person to step in as vocalist for the band. I do think it leaves room for imagination of what's he going to sound like next once he's really built up that confidence a little bit more. He's doing a great job now, but what's he going to sound like on the next one? Great record for him to step into the vocals on. Lyrically, I'm sure there are some nods to what the band has gone through, but it doesn't seem to dwell on that. Trevor had a way with lyrics. He had a way of presenting lyrics and moving words around all of these riffs. And Brian's able to do that same thing. It seems like Brian might even be a bit more of a hardcore influenced vocalist as well, just with how he's spouting his rhetoric out and he's spouting all of these lyrics out. Man, it adds a live quality to this record. And this record sounds just like that. Sounds like a fucking live band. Mark Lewis as a producer is just top notch. Everything he touches sounds so good and so pristine. The guy knows the band. The guy knows how they should sound. He's been working with them for years. The performance he got out of Alan was fantastic. I'm sure since he's worked with the band for so long, everyone's just so comfortable with him. I'm sure it was a seamless recording with it. Anything his hand touches is good. The mixing of this record's stellar. You can hear everything so well. The guitars have this very sharp, snappy quality to them. I don't know if they're purely passive pickups anymore on this album, but it's fucking there. It's probably my favorite guitar sound on a Black Dahlia Murder record in years. It's a little bit different. This album sounds very much in the same vein as Verminous and Nightbringers did. A very organic sounding record. Sometimes their mid 2000s output could be a little too compressed sometimes, but this album just sounds very natural and just aggressive and live. They're very organic, very raw sounding live. There's almost a rock and roll or a punk rock quality to it. Overall, Servitude, great record, great Halloween record. The Black Dahlia Murder should be celebrated in every iteration of the band. It's a band that will go down in history as probably one of the most consistent death metal bands outside of Cannibal Corpse. They've spent their entire career on the same label, with that being Metal Blade Records. The label is still really happy with them, it seems. The albums are still fantastic. Their live shows are still something to behold. This band still has a lot of gas left in the tank, and not a better album to listen to around the Halloween season than a new Black Dahlia Murder record. Servitude, check it out. I'm going to bed because the fucking sun's coming up and that shit burns.